Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast. I'm Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Maich.
And today we are going to talk about climate change, or climate, or the weather, or what are we talking about?
Or the planet, the environment.
The environment, climate,
the environment, the thing, the air that we breathe, the temperature that we live at, the rain that comes down, the sun that shines, those kind of things.
Volcanoes, earthquakes, landslides.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff we can talk about.
And of course, leaving this planet and living on the moon instead.
Before we do talk about climate change, I would like to raise the topic of the level of swearing in last week's episode.
Ooh, it was quite sweary. In my house, it was commented on.
Yeah, it was commented on in my house as well. In my van, it was commented on.
I see.
We were listening to it on the autobahn with a small child in the van, and Nick did a few times ago, Ivanka. And even I was starting to brace myself for the swearing. So
we can be better, we don't have to swear as much.
I certainly think we don't need to swear as much, but do we need to not swear?
I don't know about that. I think some swear words, well placed, are an extremely expressive form of communication. So I wouldn't want to rule them out, but maybe this swear jar idea that you were pitching
in the week, yes. So that was one of my ideas. I thought we could at least have a swear jar, at least have to think about how many swears it's worth.
Well, I think we just kind of try and make it not gratuitous.
Okay, fair enough. And then if we do the swear jar thing, which I think is worth having a go. Did you have a count of how many swears in the last one? No.
No. Okay. Well,
I thought this should be not a retrospective swear jar.
Well, I don't know about that.
Oh, you don't?
I think we should audit all the past. If anyone is listening to the past podcast episodes and wants to count up a tally of how many swears I did and how many Ivanka did, then we will pay. We were saying 50p, or maybe I think £1 per swear is more. Although last week is going to be expensive for you.
For me, especially.
But I mean, we won't count the bit. If someone wants to tweet us and sort of say at Podcast Grand, or just at Michael Forrest or at Ivanka, just tweet us the swear counts. Then we'll and a charity perhaps.
Yes.
Then we will we'll donate some swear money to someone.
Just some swear money. I like it. Hashtag swear money.
How was your week, Ivanka? It's been 2 weeks since I've spoken to you.
It has been 2 weeks since you have spoken to me. I have had a 2 weeks in two very distinct parts. One was end of holidays, then driving across Europe on a 2.5 day trek from Croatia to England, which I really enjoy. I don't know why. I think it was my childhood, or I spent a lot of my childhood driving around or being driven around, and so I find it, somehow I find it relaxing, and I enjoy telling my child repeatedly that we're still on the E40. Mummy, what's this road called? E40. It's still the E40. And I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who also spent a lot of her childhood being driven around Europe, and we discovered that we're both experts in European number plates. It's like a skill that does not come in useful very often, if at all.
knowing what country they're from?
Exactly. There are the EU, the introduction of the EU sort of homogeneous mass of number plates has made it trickier, but there are distinctive style differences and structural differences with number plates across Europe. So I can drive along going, oh, Hungary, haven't seen a Hungarian number plate for a while. And she did have more information than me, more knowledge, more depth of knowledge. She knew that at the time when she used to be driven around Europe, which is probably about the same time as me, that French number plates used to distinguish kind of which postcode they were from. Okay. So there you go. So we nerded out a bit about registration plates.
Well, all you can do as a kid in a car is look at number plates. I always remember fantasizing about like when P Reg comes in, and you might be able to have 155 and then OFF, and that'll be amazing. I hope I can get that number plate one day. And just, that sort of thing.
Does that count as swearing?
No.
Okay.
If I make you swear in your imagination, I didn't swear, you swore.
So there was that. There was the driving across Europe thing, and then there was this week. I arrived back. The timing of our arrival back in the UK was so that I could attend a meeting on Monday. So I basically walked out of a van into my mother's house, woke up in the morning, went to a meeting for 3.5 hours or something, and so I didn't even have time to sort of sit down, sharpen my pencils, work out what I was supposed to be doing for the week before I parachuted myself in. So what I've learned is that I need to come home a day before I start work.
Did you do a terrible job? Is that what you're saying?
No, actually, I did an excellent job in the meeting. The problem was that then I had no clue what I was supposed to be doing afterwards or where I was supposed to. So that's not that I'm doing myself a disservice. What I had was normally I like to have an idea of what I've got to get done in a week and who I need to speak to and what meetings I need to set up and just do your prep for the week. And I didn't get a chance to do that. So I feel like I've been catching up with myself all week. So that's what's happened to me this week. But yeah, here I am. I've made the podcast more or less on time. So
close enough.
That's good. I'm going to end the week on a high, feeling more in control and organised. What about you, Michael? Are you recovered from your illnesses?
I am recovered, and I sort of went into this new job, and it's been quite nice. Sort of finishing at 5:30, and I've got time to sort of go to the studio after work. Like if Sharon's sort of got something in the evening, then I can sort of spend 3 hours and still feel good. So I sort of did a bit of stuff in the studio. So that's nice, which I couldn't have done if I was doing these like 40 minutes each way bike rides and sort of finishing late every day, and
Oh, so you're working from home?
No, I'm just working somewhere that's really near.
Oh, that's nice.
It's like 5 minutes on my bike, so I come home at lunchtime, make myself something. So I'm saving some money. I'm eating healthier.
Blimey.
Yeah, so it's all right. Although I have been conscious that I did take a bit of a pay cut on this. And after our conversation, I was, about how hard it is to recover from a pay cut. I was like, should I have done this? Why did I do this? Is the quality of life improvement worth the less money? Or am I kind of causing myself problems for the next one? Or what's happening? But, I'm not, I don't think I'm greedy. But, sometimes you're like...
Wow.
But yeah, if I can sort of have a decent lunch and if I can kind of go home at a reasonable time, then yeah, it's all good.
I had this conversation with somebody in the week. I don't think you should I don't think taking a pay cut is always a bad thing. A job is not. The rewards of a job are not just in your paycheck. But I spoke to somebody about this in the week, and there's this whole living in Brighton. There's this whole thing about how much less money are you willing to earn and not have to commute to London. And there is people always offer it up as a benefit, but then the amount of money they expect you to reduce your salary by is quite dramatic. But actually not having to commute is a Well, I was going to say it's a massive improvement to life, but I still miss my reading time. So,
Well, I'm missing my podcast time now. Like, I was listening to podcasts on the way in each day, and now I'm like, I sort of don't really have any time to listen to anything anymore.
Exactly. It's like, when do I listen to podcasts? So I listen to podcasts now more when I'm walking the dog, walking around town, or but reading, don't know when I'm supposed to do that. So, every cloud has silver linings. So that's where we are then with our weeks.
I'm reading a very good book actually at the moment.
You?
Called Beware of Pity by Stefan, I'm going to pronounce this the German way, Zweig. Stefan, it's very good. It's apparently Wes Anderson is a big fan of this writer. And there was a few different books in the kitchen, and I thought, right, I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs of each one until something grabs me, and this one straight away. Like, I've read some mediocre rubbish, and then I picked up this and I was like, yes, that's how you write a book. So, subject at hand.
Subject at hand.
Where do we start?
I don't know, it's a tricky one. I was thinking about this. One of the thoughts I had was about the fact that apparently when it comes to persuading somebody that climate change is real, you're wasting your time.
Okay.
And you're better off persuading them to change habits that benefit the climate, and that's an easier task. So, for example, the whole you can save loads of money on your electricity bill if you hang your washing up outside in the sunshine, or you use LED light bulbs rather than climate change is real. The world's climate is changing. The Arctic is never going to ice over again, or these various fact-based but terrifying bits of data.
What is that list? What is that list of things? The oceans are rising. We're going to lose a lot of land mass. There's going to be more unusual activity.
More unusual weather patterns.
Yeah.
Which has an effect on physically where you're living. It has an effect on crops. So there are scenarios where, for example, if you can't grow food, there'll be more migration of people because what was arable land becomes no longer arable because there is no water, or there is too much water, or it's too hot or too cold, or the seasons become so unpredictable. So, I mean, we already have this happening in certain places, and this is where I for the first time on a podcast really regret not having a list of facts in front of me. But I thought that if you but I don't know how much I personally care to carry around the facts in my head. I mean,
also, I've seen a good point made about how actually getting the facts is really difficult, and there's a lot of, it's actually quite there's a lot of sort of opaque academic journals and academic reports and things like, to actually kind of collect the real facts together is like, it's actually quite hard to find a good scientifically backed list of the problems, because it's sort of like spread in a lot of places, and it's all kind of in the realm of academia, and they're not into explaining things clearly. They're into kind of wordy, kind of, opaque explanations of things.
One of the exercises I did when I, after that climate change tweet back to President Donald Trump, I thought, okay, I'm gonna make my Twitter feed all about climate change and links to climate change articles, and I'm going to do some research, and I'm going to get them all lined up in one of those like Buffer or something, and I emailed a few people I know. I've got a friend who does used to be a producer at the BBC, used to work on Horizon. She's a scientist. I emailed a woman called Gabriella. I'm very sorry, Gabriella, I can't remember your surname.
Walker!
But I'd heard her on Infinite Monkey Cage talking about climate change. So I emailed her and she sent me links to a stream of Guardian articles where business people were talking about, not about climate change, but talking about actually the business opportunities in climate change and combating climate change, because often it's like perceived as they're getting rid of the coal industry, they're getting rid of jobs, and that's why the sort of the anti-climate change or the climate change non-believers are somehow lump it in with they're attacking my job. And they're being defensive. And actually, as a business, there were some quite cool, quite powerful business people talking about the business advantage of thinking about these new products, of making new things, of new opportunity to sell people stuff. I mean, that's what business is driven by. But that at the same time will change the impact that we're having on the climate. So, but then I also got a link to one of these scientific journals, and I mean, I did read in detail the paper about how to persuade people to change their behaviour. That's where I got that information from. But I would have had to almost turn it into a kind of a job to be translating these science papers into some sort of BuzzFeedy digestible facts on this is what will happen. I don't know how much of it we could point at and say is. We can point at what is happening and we can predict what effect that might have. But this is where we had talked about trying to get an actual expert on.
Yeah, and we will do that in future. Yeah. I think we've got enough of our sort of immediate understanding that we can sort of have this our first coverage of climate change. I think we've got enough. But yeah, it would definitely be good to get someone who actually does this for a living.
Yes.
In the absence of BuzzFeed listicles and
and all that kind of stuff.
It's weird, this recent backlash to the climate change topic, because it's been a part of my whole I watched episode 1 of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air the other week, which was on Netflix, and one of the stories there is this is 1990, and the daughter is doing some big climate change sort of fundraiser thing, and I'm like, yeah, we've been talking about this for 20 years, more than 20. Is that 30 years? Yeah, 30 years. It's just been part of it was CFCs and all that, in the 80s. And
I thought about this. Well, exactly. I was thinking about my physics class when I was maybe 14, 15, talking about global warming and greenhouse gases. I can remember doing that when I was, 13, 12, 11, whatever.
Yeah, so it's been a part of our education.
Yeah.
So it's sort of weird that instead of sort of kind of pushing innovation and pushing solutions and coming up, focusing on more things we can do, that people are instead deciding that they want to start denying it because it's you can't see, because it's this is even with smart people, I think there when it comes to chaos theory, which is we've got systems the weather is a chaotic system. It's sort of an implicitly very unpredictable thing, and you sort of it's sensitive to initial conditions, all this kind of stuff, butterfly effect, all this kind of thing. But so I think people in general don't really understand weather, to the point that a group of mutual friends, very clever people, sort of came to me saying they wanted to do this sort of weather app, and they were going to make it more accurate by aggregating the average weather predictions from different sources. And I sort of had to say, that's not how it works. That's not how chaotic systems work. You can't just take the average, because it's things get amplified and things get made. Things can go one way or the other, and it's not as straightforward. It doesn't get more predictable the more I mean, there's a certain amount of being able to get more data, giving you more accurate predictions, but taking an average of different things is never going to do that. So just even like at a high level, there's sort of a lack of understanding of what the weather is like. So, and then, that's why you get Trump going, but it's warm somewhere. No, but it's cold here. So
therefore there's no global warming.
Disproven. It got colder one day. Yeah, that's not how weather works. That's not how the climate works. You have to look at long-term patterns and trends, and you have to do actual science, and science is knowing how to look at nature to form more accurate. So either if you want to see something small, you need a microscope. That's the tool you use to inspect it. If you want to understand climate change, you need to sort of look at on geological timescales and sort of much longer timescales, and you have to sort of look at a graph, because if you just kind of look outside, that's not a good way of collecting data on this subject.
So one of the things that happened when I mentioned that in physics we learned about global warming, and the phrase was global warming in the early 2000s. I don't know how you call them. I remember reading a thing Seth Godin wrote, which was about the fact that if it had never been called global warming, which just sounds lovely, doesn't it? Isn't it nice? Everything's going to be warmer and no one's going to be cold. And rather he suggested it should have been called something like climate cancer or earth death or some kind of climate cancer was definitely one of them. It's like if it had been called that from the very start, people might have taken it more seriously and change their behaviours more quickly, because it's taken a while for it to go from global warming. Climate change is now the new global warming phrase. Global warming, but has to be one of the reasons. It just sounds so sort of soft and cuddly, and it is far from that. And then one of the other things I was thinking about with the I forgot. So there's this thing about understanding the science of climate and weather and climate change. In the same way that I don't necessarily feel that I need to understand how a medicine works in order to take a recommendation from a pharmacist. I don't necessarily think that I need to understand climate change. I don't need to be a climate change scientist or have their understanding in order to accept that it is happening and I need to change my behaviour. And I think that's one thing. Like, I mean, we're both the kind of people that seek to understand stuff, for sure. Yeah. But I also accept, I have to, because I'm not a polymath. I am willing to accept recommendations from experts, people who study this shit. If they tell me, does that count as a swear word? People who study this stuff.
We can edit that one out though.
If they tell me that the climate is changing, and it has been, and that's going to have a significant impact on the planet, the future of the planet, the future livability of the planet, then I'm up for taking their recommendations and seeing what I can do to change my impact.
Yeah, I think it would behoove them to try and make themselves a bit clearer, because they are this is a particular, you are basically being asked as a member of the public to take a lot on faith that goes against your sort of like intuitive perception of what's happening around you. So I really do think there is a gap of sort of explanation there that could be improved. But yeah, you can't understand everything, and you have to go, okay, well, look, I mean, the guy saying that there isn't climate change clearly has a lot of vested interests and commercial reasons to be saying that, and just seems like a shady person. Whereas these all normal scientists that are looking at data, they clearly, it's the other way. They're just trying to understand the world, and when they talk to you, it's complicated, and that's because it is. Yeah.
It is complicated. Yeah. And I think one of the arguments against this whole accepting what scientists say and not seeking to engage at all is that then there's this other part of the argument, which I think actually somebody quoted me Tony Blair saying something. I wonder if we need a little s that should always be said after Tony Blair's name.
Okay.
But there's this kind of idea like that, don't worry about these things. Science will provide us with the answer and the solution. We can engineer and science our way out of this.
Well, I'm gonna get onto that subject because that's been a philosophy of mine.
Yeah.
Craig Venter. My feeling was technology has put us in this situation, so let's use technology to get us out of it. And I always, and when in the sort of 90s, I was reading about nanotechnology and like solving, healing the ozone layer by kind of bioengineering tiny little robots that can go and repair things, and like actually just putting some hardcore science to solve the problems. And then so I got interested in Craig Venter's work, and he's doing sort of like reprogramming organisms, and he's done a TED talk on like using technology and cleverness to sort of reverse the things. But yeah, you do get into that. Because I don't think you can like once the box is open, I don't think you can put the lid back on really. And even as we put the brakes on, like as other people are kind of getting access to these new in different countries, they're sort of like going to have these periods of stuff. So I think, yes, we do need to kind of moderate our kind of rampant, like just don't be horrible. But I always thought like the solution would have to be like some sort of clever innovation rather than just like not doing certain things.
And that's definitely part of it. All the advancements in battery technology, there's loads of things and loads of articles and science and engineering that you can point at that say, yep, there have been some dramatic changes in the technology around storing energy that will have a significant impact on the amount of energy, greenhouse gases we need to produce it. Because one of the problems with things like solar is that you can only use your solar on a sunny day, and then then it's lost, and you might overproduce on that day. Go on.
Energy is abundantly available, but transferring it is very difficult. If we could just like put solar panels in space, we'd have all the energy we could ever possibly need, but you can't get the energy from space to here without like some sort of microwave beam or like impossibly long cable or like shipping batteries up and down. Like it's this, it's weird. Like, so batteries, it's a huge deal like as a technology, isn't it? But then they have a lot of mass, like weight, so you can sort of move them around. And but I love this democratization of like the power grid, the idea that you could put energy back in as well as take it out. I think that's a great, like, and the more we can get into these sort of like distributed systems, the better.
Well, I watched the founder of Good Energy speak at Meaning Conference last year, and she she very much talks about about individuals being producers of energy, sort of having and selling back to the grid. I mean, that's kind of what all their work's based around. But just because you watch an article about how some doctors have reattached a hand doesn't mean that you go and get a chainsaw and chop your hand off. These are...
It's a strange... Well,
it's not strange, because you're talking about this idea that science can
Right, because it
stuff.
Can be... Yeah, doesn't mean that you should fuck it in the first place.
No.
And that's why I did like heavily caveat that I think we should like stem like what we're doing. But at the same time, once the genie's out of the bottle, people want to take flights to other countries, and that's not going to change.
And flight is a really interesting one. I mean, I really enjoy travelling, and I did one of those, I do them quite regularly. One of those, I know, Friends of the Earth or somebody measure your carbon footprint thing. And taking even a short haul flight has a dramatic impact on your carbon footprint for the year. And you're like, well, I don't want to not fly, but so I'm going to. I try and be a bit more selective about how often and when. I try not to be wasteful, and I think wasteful is a word that for me is really important. It's like, we if you don't throw away all your light bulbs that are functioning because somebody's invented an LED light bulb, but as they start going, replace them with more energy efficient things. It's that kind of approach. Or given the choice of buying, I don't know, strawberries from Surrey and strawberries that got flown in from South Africa, why not have the ones that grew in the UK? That kind of stuff. Just
I should pay more attention, but usually there's only one kind of strawberries in my shop. So. Yeah, it's not clear what all the things we can do. I wish there was a way that we could see any positive effect we were having. I wish it was possible to actually measure that minuscule kind of impact that we were making as individuals, because it just seems so kind of like
drop in the ocean.
Small. Like it just seems like, well, I mean, so if I do it, there's only, everyone in the rest of the world has to do this, and then it's still like, okay, I'm not using. I mean, I stopped using carrier bags more when just sometimes the Tesco's I was near didn't have them. Sometimes. So then I was like, I just got into that habit of bringing the carrier bag all the time, bringing like a tote bag with me every time. And and part of me was like this kind of absolute fetishization and demonization of using a carrier bag just seems sort of like, okay, yeah, it's bad, but like, I mean, there's so much, many.
I remember being in Patagonia, with and going to the shop, and I didn't realise this town didn't give out bags, and so I got a couple of boxes, and my arms, by the time I'd carried everything back to the campsite,
boxes,
because I could, that's all I could find in the shop to not be juggling the shopping back, and that was annoying because I did actually have tote bags on the motorbike and in the but I just hadn't, I don't know why I hadn't taken them. It's one of those, it's the most uncomfortable carrying my shopping back from the shop experience I've ever had.
Well, tote bags are good because you can put it on your shoulder, and I always, like, anytime I leave the house now, I've got my bag with me, so just because it's just easier, it's just better.
It is easier. Sometimes. I'm slightly guilty of having a bag of bags.
You have that drawer. Harry Hill's got this bit where it's like, it's all very well saving your carrier bags, but at a certain point you can't get the drawer closed anymore.
I think one of the reasons I get Ocado to do my shopping is so that, like, once a month I can have a clear out of any plastic bags we've collected. So there you go. It's apparently
I think we're actually very good in our house. We haven't got a drawer of carrier bags.
No, we don't anymore.
Yeah, sometimes I can't even find one when I need one.
No, and you do sometimes need them. One does.
Especially with a dog, you probably need...
yeah, but we buy... That's a whole different conversation. There's sort of like researching biodegradable options of poo bags for your dog. Where you have to be careful because some of those cornstarch ones, they're not... You have some very unpleasant experiences.
So how do you feel your environmental impact has been affected by pet ownership and child rearing, child having?
The child having is large. So I did the reusable nappies thing. I did it very religiously, very easily when I was at home all the time with her when she was a tiny baby. As she got bigger and started moving around more, she just started being smelly. So then I bought those. There are natty nappies, or whatever they're called, the biodegradable, but you have to make a conscious choice to buy those because they're really expensive and very rarely on special offer, so you have to kind of look out for special offers. And then I have resorted to I have got a mix and match of, you've got to find, because if you're basically buying a nappy that is, and that's not true of that particular brand, but if you're buying a nappy that then simply doesn't do the job, you end up having to wash a load of clothes and bedclothes anyway. So I'm not sure, you know what I mean? It's all a bit checks and balances. Sometimes it's really, really hard, I think, to work out what the environmentally friendly option truly is.
Yeah, it's like, how do you? So if you've got how much does it? What's the environmental impact of laundering a dirty nappy versus buying a fresh one? I don't know.
Well, you see,
sometimes.
it's not. I mean, it does work out. I think. It works out if you're going to do that washable nappies thing, and that's your 100% position. Then the environment. But then if you're going to use, I don't have a tumble dryer. I don't have a dryer. But actually, I don't find it that big a problem. Could be because she's a spring baby. I don't know.
What's the implications of a spring baby?
You can dry your washing outside.
Okay.
You know, like she's not. Winter's the biggest problem for drying washing, isn't it? But we're kind of a clothes horse in the corner. Hope the washing dries before it starts smelling musty. Kind of a family.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, too.
It's like put it near the radiator and hope. Fingers crossed. But but then so every so often you switch the heating on because the washing's not dry. And like, but I wouldn't have had the heating on if it wasn't for the wet washing. So I've been researching those clothes horses that you plug in and they heat up. It's just I had this on the subject of consuming. I went to a number of years ago, a Brighton Uni organised this networking event, and I think it was when I'd just come back from travelling or something. I thought, I better do a bit of networking, find some work, blah, blah. So I went along to this event and they got us all at tables and they had some people from a department in the university talking about ethical shopping. And then they had us do some sort of exercise where you ordered your decision making based on a number of factors. And one thing I learnt that evening was that making the definition of ethical shopping is quite tricky, because if you are very, very poor, it is ethically the most responsible thing you have to do is choose the things you can afford, because to undermine your family's financial stability to buy some sort of more expensive option with a lower, you have a sort of ethical duty to your family to not overspend or to live. But the other thing that was very clear to me, that I seemed to be the only person certainly at my table and one of very few in the room that sat there going, no, if I go into a coffee shop, I think carefully about where the coffee's from, whether it's fair trade, I do pay attention to these things. It doesn't mean that I always choose not to buy it, or whether, and of course I've consumed plenty of disposable coffee cups, but I do try not to. And that sounds so lame, doesn't it? I try really hard, but I had to buy a plastic bottle of water the other day because being 100% committed to these things is very tricky.
Not practical
it's
all
not
the time.
Practical all the time.
I don't think I'm very good at this. I mean, I do what I can, but the problem is, I feel like it's all sort of anecdotal things. Okay, carrier bags are bad. Or like running the dishwasher is actually better than doing the washing up in the sink. Like, I've heard that one. And so I was like, well, okay. But I've never seen any data on it. I've just heard this anecdote. So I've changed my behaviour because of an anecdote. But we need better measurement of these things. I need to be able to sort of see the data a bit more to be able to actually make rational decisions about these things, because I'm just so disconnected from what the effects actually are. And I think like smart meters are sort of step 0.0 in that journey. Like, at least now, like, we've got the thing in the kitchen now, so I can sort of see, like, okay, we're spending 5p a minute.
Not a minute, an hour.
Because a couple of lights are on upstairs or whatever. Let's go and turn them. Let's try and get the number down. I don't like that our smart meter only goes down to 1p a minute.
An hour.
And it's generally around like 2 or 3p when all the lights are on. I sort of want to see an extra decimal place on there. But I really I think, like, if I could just, if it was more intuitive to sort of see the supply chain for each product. Like, I don't even look at the country of origin. I could do that, couldn't I? I could just look at that. I don't know if they like obscure that the way they try and obscure calorie counts on things. But it's just, I wish there was a more consistent way of being able to judge your effect. because so much of it is anecdotal to me.
It-
So I just hear of each new thing. Okay, I shouldn't be buying coffees all the time.
I did have a conversation with somebody I know who used to work for a company that supplied to the catering industry, including things like cups and coffee stirrers, and he was talking to me about the fact that loads of suppliers, especially in Brighton. Brighton's quite a conscious city, and so a lot of the coffee shops are phoning him up, going, "Have you got a compostable version?" Because our customers keep asking for them, and he was like, "Well." Of course they have, they sold them to them. But he said, some of those things that are compostable are only compostable in an industrial composting machine, not at the bottom of your garden in your compost heap. And B, he said, why can't you? What is it about your life that means that you can't sit in a coffee shop for 10 minutes and drink a coffee out of a porcelain cup and have a more pleasant experience? Why do you need to walk around town carrying your coffee? And frankly, I lay the full blame for all coffee consumption to product placement as done by, I don't know, Starbucks in Sex and the City or whatever it was, and when everybody was walking around with coffee cups, and suddenly that became like the must-have accessory. So in the same way that bloody De Beers invented the engagement ring, the diamond engagement ring, this is another thing that's been foisted upon us by marketing.
But I had one of these reusable sort of like porcelain, but looks like one of these coffee cups.
Yeah.
Looks like a sort of coffee shop. But the problem with that was it was too. There wasn't enough. You could put enough coffee in it. It was really big and sort of heavy, but then there was hardly any coffee in it, and then you had to deal with it. Like,
I have got one that's got a lockable lid that I use for water, because if I occasionally I sort of go, I'll have a coffee in there, and then my water just tastes horrible for ages. I've stopped doing that. And then I bought one in a local coffee shop, but the lid is dreadful. So I don't actually have the confidence to drink out of the lid. So I should have done some sort of like research before I bought this. But now I've got one that I actually quite like. I wouldn't put it in my bag full, whereas my lockable water one I am happy to sling anywhere and it's totally safe. But this coffee one is actually pleasant to drink out of, which I think
that's the main thing. That's important. It's quite nice drinking out of a paper cup sometimes, but yeah.
I don't know, I got very annoyed yesterday. I sat down, I deliberately arranged to meet somebody. Well, she suggested a coffee. I was like, let's meet in the coffee shop. And I thought, we're going to sit down. I'm going to treat myself. So I ordered a drink. And then he gave it to me in a disposable cup. And he was like, I can transfer it now. Because I kind of did a passive-aggressive English, like, to the person I was with, without saying anything. And he said, do you want me to put it in a proper cup? I was like, well, no, because the whole point of doing this was to not create the waste. And now I'm sitting here having wasted a bloody paper cup.
So good.
So good.
It's when I was younger, like there was a lot more sort of stigma to sort of looking a bit crusty and like carrying a thermos around and like being environmentally conscious. I actually used to have kind of, if you were kind of doing stuff like that, there was a stigma and that sort of like rampant commercialism of like, I've got my disposable coffee cup and I've got my carrier bags from the shops, and it's sort of a status symbol, wasn't it? And like if you were just like reusing a carrier bag, you're a bit crusty. Like, but now it feels a lot more like, it's definitely sort of a bit more the other way around. I imagine certainly in Brighton, if you were sort of like
look down your nose at people carrying disposable carrier bags and disposable coffee cups. And there was also a new thing. I must remember what their name is. So I think it's one of those things we'll include as a link somewhere. But there's a sticker now some places around Brighton have, which says, "We will fill your water up for you." Your water bottle. So it's like a water bottle refill place. So you don't have to buy anything in order to go, excuse me. I mean, I think legally organisations are obliged to fill up your water container if you ask for water, because I used to test everybody around Victoria Station when I could excuse me, can I have some water? We haven't got a tap. What do you mean you haven't got a tap? I mean, come on, I'm not buying anything from here anymore. But yes, rampant consumerism. Interesting.
And another reason not to buy bottled water is because it's stored for longer and it's more likely to be growing algae in there. So you're better off with tap water. Don't buy bottled water. Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, we have a sort of water filter at home. We have like a Brita filter, which, you know, if you really kind of don't want to drink tap water, I kind of like. But I've always been happy to drink tap water, and it's good. Like,
yeah,
you know,
me too.
It's like we have very good, you know, it's as good, if not better, than this bloody bottled water you're getting sold by the Coca-Cola company.
Yeah, and lots of it is by the Coca-Cola company. In one of these, what I think you were alluding to earlier, in that all these different parts of the world at different level of progress, they are going to go through the phases that we have gone through. We've kind of gone past the rampant consumer. Well, I hope, you know, we're maybe a little bit on a drift towards consciously, but like, you know, whatever.
Come on, people.
So there's that, and you have all these people that go travelling and sort of go, oh well, you know, it's all been spoilt now because everyone's got a microwave. It's like, these people have a right to a washing machine and all these things that save us infinite amounts of time. You can't stop progress for them just because, like, oh my god, it's spoilt now. But anyway, that's a different conversation.
Quaint anymore.
Yeah. So
my
anyway,
holiday was ruined.
But so I was in Yugoslavia in a time, and a part of Yugoslavia that was sort of rural, but everybody chucked stuff in this. So the valley had a river going through it, and it had an irrigation system that had been built by the Austro-Hungarians. So prior to them building this, it had been quite a floodplain by the looks of history. But so we had this substantial stream, an engineered stream going in front of our house. So you have to go over a little bridge from the road to our house. And everybody chucked stuff in this water because it's not going to be outside their house. It's going to go down the downstream, and that's just a mentality that existed at the time. And you know, I was, you know, in some sort of in the organisation school, and being as it was at the time, sort of a communist, there was all these like youth actions and all this, and we did park cleanups and all this kind of stuff. And I remember actually starting to cry when I was talking to these. I was like, people, we need to stop. You can't just keep throwing things in the river. It's all right. You just, because it's you're the sort of unspoilt nature is in such an abundance here. You're not respecting it enough. So
taking it for granted.
You're taking it totally for granted. You're not living in inner city Birmingham. You really did have to travel to green spaces. I mean, we're lucky in a lot of British cities. Parks are protected, and we do have these big. It's not like Central Park in New York, where there's nothing green in the whole of New York until you get to Central Park, and it's amazing. You know, British cities have this kind of, you know, regular occurrence of parks, and so we are quite lucky. But anyway, I digressed a bit.
You kind of reminded me of the kind of the myth of the noble savage at one with nature and using the land respectfully, and that's never been a thing. It's just been a matter of capability. And if you give those people the technology that we're using, they're going to do exactly the same thing. Like, there's a complete myth, this kind of like, oh, religious, oh, we respect the earth thing. That never happened. It was just literally, there's always been, humans have always been prone to, you know, you sort of exploit, and it's just survival, trying to like live. You just kind of look for the resources, you use them up, you move on, you use them up. That's how humanity has operated everywhere. There's no magical land where that didn't happen. But now we are the first animal to actually start to realize that we need to moderate our impact on our environment, or we're not going to have one anymore. And so, this is a modern progression, and there's no kind of going back to some simpler time now. We just need to kind of be conscious of what we're doing and improve what we're doing, because it's happening.
It is happening. It's not
and
good.
There's no way around it. But let's say if we did ruin everything like that, there's actually a lot of ideas about, but I'm going to say, like, So there's this idea of space stations in geostationary orbits where you could sort of simulate gravity by rotating. You farm crops, farm rabbits, do different things to kind of eat and have a little society. There's sort of terraforming ideas, and then there's like just making a big spaceship. But I've been, and I used that. It used to appeal to me as an idea, but then I kind of thought that's going to be the ultimate kind of provinces, isn't it? That's going to be the ultimate in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing cool happening like situation to live in. And also, like, the more you've sort of like moved house, you're like, I mean, it's hard enough moving house. It's hard enough going to a foreign country to live. Like, I've done that, moved to another country on my own and tried to sort of like start fresh somewhere. And it's like, it's no fun. So imagine trying to do that in space. I think, like, it was like you were saying about that you wouldn't chop your hand off just because you know that science can create a new one for you. It's still a headache. Like, let's just try and like not have to deal with the headache in the first place, even if it is possible, if expensive, to, retroactively solve problems we've caused. But I actually think, like, I used to romanticize a bit of space colonization. Now I'm like, I mean, I've heard it secondhand from Shuttleworth. Sounded nice, but it also sounded a bit smelly.
I was going to mention, because I think when it comes to space travel, I am a bit of a Luddite, or I can't imagine getting on any kind of flying device and being sort of like, I almost want to, makes me feel like I'm going to hyperventilate with panic, is like in a claustrophobic.
Well, what about a space elevator?
Well, I don't know. I went. I think it literally is a visceral reaction. I went snorkeling one time. We were waiting for a ferry in Croatia on one of the islands, and we just thought, pop in for a little swim. It was a tiny port, but obviously it had to be deep enough to take a ferry. And I sort of got underwater, and it was so deep that I just felt my lungs sort of go, because it was my brain couldn't, like, it was just too much for me. And the idea of going into space for me is exactly the same as going, this is an environment that I love swimming, but I wouldn't go diving, for example. It's just not for me. If going to Mars happens to be the future solution, I shall happily wish my child luck and wave her on her way, but I'll probably hang out down here going, no, you're right. Oh, they'll have to sedate me or something.
You'll be in the sort of like Blade Runner city, kind of like an empty, decrepit house, surrounded by the robots you've made for yourself,
listening to my podcast.
You talking about scuba diving just makes me think it's just you kind of, the idea of a coral reef and swimming down and seeing like a Coke bottle, it's just so gross, isn't it? Like gross. Humans being gross. I think we should stop. And then, God, I don't see landfills. I don't see like oil, the gross stuff, the sort of collections. The fish are all, like 90% of fish have got plastic in there. I don't know, there's all this stuff. It's just gross, and I don't like gross stuff. So if humanity could, as a whole, try and become less gross, that would make me very happy.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. I think it's. I remember going on this as part of the bike trip. You can't drive through Panama into Colombia. You have to get on a boat. And we got on this fishing boat called the Stahlratte, which is a German fishing boat. Brilliant thing, brilliant outfit. But you go through these things called the San Blas Islands, and they are sand islands, and they are covered in rubbish. And there's no point picking it up. Like you find yourself. I mean, I do this. I go walking on the South Downs. I'll come home with a collection of those gel things that runners take. Because it's like, just why are you here throwing this on the floor? Or the people who decorate bushes with filled poo bags in it because they think that like the dog poo fairy is going to come along at some point and take it away. I mean, anyway,
somebody else's problem.
There's somebody else's problem. But, in Sandblat, I know, so you're inevitably collecting these plastic bottles and rubbish, but you've got nowhere to take it or put it. It's just, it's just awful. It's horrible.
So in Shoreditch, when I was living there, we didn't have like recycling bags. I was like, well, come on. Like, yeah, but I can't do this if I've got to like walk for 10 minutes with 3 carrier bags of bottles. Like, I'm not going to be not going to be able to sustain that. We need help. It is very much a sort of like local government sort of responsibility, and to kind of at least make those things low friction and easy to do. And just the more stuff that we can make just easier, it's
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, you've got to give the path of least resistance has to be to do the right thing with your rubbish. That's just that's just a human nature. If you're going to make it work, it's not going to get done. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
So that's where science and technology and engineering can be clever and coming up with solutions that does make it the path of least resistance. So
yeah,
it's that kind of thing. Make it easy.
I just wish I knew more things. And that's you just reminded me of like another anecdotal thing of like, oh, I've got my 6-pack kind of rings thing. I'm just going to break those open so that dolphins get them trapped on this. It's like I need more things that I can do, because I will do them, but I just don't know what the list is of things that I'm supposed to. And there needs to be like a constant conversation of new things, I suppose.
So I had a conversation this week on Tinternets with a friend of mine about she'd posted a thing about the plastic in the Adriatic Sea. She's Croatian and she also lives in Brighton. And she and I had this time when I was on the Jadrolinija ferry, which is a firm that goes in between all the islands in Croatia land. I'd noticed they've all got those little plastic stirrers so that you can't buy a takeaway cup, but all of the they've just got loads and loads of those tiny little plastic stirrers, which are like they're if you've ever been to a beach cleanup event, they're a nightmare because you've got to really look for them. But so I was thinking, so I sort of walked away with this sort of vague idea of writing to them, and I talked to her and I said I was thinking writing together, and she said, yeah, that's all very well, but really it's the manufacturers have a responsibility to make those right choices for us, so you don't have to think about what am I supposed to do with that plastic thing around the cans. Once it's been proven that it's damaging to animals, stop selling me your products with this thing that is going to, strangle a turtle. It's not cool, and it is your responsibility.
It is, and that's where why governments have to do like impose these regulations, because people are just trying to get by, and they will find the way that helps them do the best for their family. They're trying to. They're just, and that I'm sort of romanticizing a little bit here. Like, here's a Chinese factory with, and they've kind of set up for making these things. I'm sure they'd be just as happy to get set up to make something that's a bit more. That there just needs to be that drive. There needs to be that control somewhere. There needs to be that sort of market demand, like that needs to be in place, because like. When you're talking about business people, they're just looking for opportunities and looking for a way and just doing the only thing they know, and to kind of also then have to think about your environmental impact is just it's a different mindset, isn't it? And so that's the only way, Donald, is government regulation. I'm sorry.
It is your responsibility. You've now reminded me of what my point was from earlier that I completely forgot about, and that is about the ozone layer. The ozone layer has been fixed through, identifying what gas it is that produced it and stopping people from using it. And
are we saying it's fixed? Is it fixed?
It's not. It's fixing. It's growing back to
it's growing back.
There has been positive news about the ozone layer, but that's taken. And I will make a point of finding some scientific article to back up my claim. But that was a that was an approach taken. Right, here's a thing that is causing problems. We need to legislate against it. And end of discussion. And it's the same with Theresa May announcing yesterday a 25-year plan for plastic reduction. 25 years. 25 years. It's just like it's a placating statement. It's totally designed to, stick a dummy in a baby's mouth and just kind of go, oh, there you go, while I'll make you something. It's just ridiculous. But I think that this has come up in a couple of our chats, and it's possibly a theme, but it might just be a blog post or just a 1 minute statement. But let's see. There's something about the creativity enhancements of design constraints. And I think that's one of the problems with the fabulously rich that we talked about last week, the fabulously wealthy. Their design constraints there are none, because they can just buy another one or buy a bigger one or get more. And so they're without that kind of necessity being the mother of invention type statement. It's like, unless we put a design constraint on these firms that say you cannot ship your products if they are going to be environmentally damaging, you cannot ship willy-nilly massive amounts of plastic, you've got to look for alternatives. They won't. And there's a chance that if you do put these, there is a strong possibility that if you start imposing design constraints via legislation and via consumer pressure, but that sometimes is difficult to make loud enough, they might well come up with some fabulous solutions. But, unless science is actually looking and engineering is looking to produce the solutions to these problems, then they're definitely not going to do it. So
it's annoying because plastic's really clever. It's really been a really useful invention for humanity. Like, you used to have to buy stuff in tins and like cheese wrapped in paper and it just...
What's wrong with tins?
Was a very good idea. It
is.
But yeah. But we just need to be responsible, and we need to kind of do better. But it's annoying because it was clever.
We don't have to ban plastic in its entirety, but just because we can make something out of plastic doesn't necessarily mean that that's the most appropriate thing to make out of plastic. It's like I think all these little bits like disposable straws, spoons. These are the kind of things that actually micro beads in cosmetics. Those have been banned. Don't know if maybe that doesn't appear in your Facebook feed because you're not a lady.
I think I've heard the term, but maybe once ages ago.
But they're like
thankfully
I'm not like I'm not a cosmetics consumer, but there's lots of these things that you use to clean your face that have these plastic micro beads in, which you can't even bloody see them, let alone pick them up off a beach or filter them out of the oceans. So an outright ban, that's some positive news. That's happened.
Yeah, that's good. My posh speakers that I'm looking at now.
Yeah.
First thing I bought that instead of a plastic innards, it actually had a cotton sheet wrapped around it.
Yeah. But that's not
that level of poshness.
But my veggie box, those nets that your onions come in or your oranges, they've now got ones made out of cotton.
Yeah.
And they're actually quite nice. So
and is cotton good? Is cotton okay?
I don't know. It's not plastic. I think it biodegrades is the point. If you I think you can put it on your compost. I put it on my compost heap, so I'll tell you in a while whether or not.
All right, sounds good.
Let you know. I do experiments with these things. My mum and I don't. I buy things because my mum has an allotment, and so I get all my compostables, and we including things like supposedly compostable nappies. We've done experiments just to see if it did actually what happened. Only one, because there's limits, but that kind of so I'll let you know how we get on with the cotton bags. But at Riverford, who I am happy to endorse, they actually put an effort into finding out what to replace their packaging with, because even though a veggie box has a lot less packaging than when you go and buy your veggies in a supermarket, kind of by default, they still have to use it for strawberries and blueberries and things like that. So but they're obviously looking at alternatives. And if your local authority doesn't take back plastic bags, they will. You can just put them in with your.
Right.
So it's that kind of stuff that just says we're more than just flogging you some vegetables.
Yeah, and different countries. Yeah, Germany had much more of a culture of returning glass bottles and things like that, and
Well,
but
Croatia's brought this thing in now where you can return your plastic bottles. So you actually
okay.
get it actually 6p per bottle. So that has massively cleaned up the amount of plastic bottles discarded everywhere, because people then actually collect them and take them back.
It's
So-
funny because like 5p. Like, why do I care about 5p for a carrier bag? But like I do. So it is one of those nudges. So yeah, 5p to get back your thing. It's just it's sort of a meaning. It's such a small value, but it's for some reason psychologically, just kind of changes your, makes you kind of want to do the other thing. So, like, what can we do? Are there who's lobbying? Are there charities that lobby the government, or like who lobbies for these sorts of changes? How could like how can we? What can we do?
What can we do? I don't know. I think as consumers, even though I said earlier that we don't have a lot of power, we do. If you don't buy stuff, or if you don't, but it has to be all of us.
Yeah, and I don't want to sort of do something, like a sort of BBC TV thing. At the end, here are 4 things that you can do and everything's going to be all right again, because it's absolutely not like that. But I'm just literally thinking, right, so it sounds like, I feel like legislation, I feel like design constraints, things like that, like, nudge psychology, this kind of thing, they're all going to work. But is there anything I can do to, like, make that happen? I suppose,
Well, it's the same with anything. You've got your choices of voting and spending money. You can either vote with cash or vote with your vote.
I've always had a weird thing about, in my head, like voting for the Green Party or a party that is about the environment, because it seems like that's one of several things, and like defense, education, this, that, and the other. It's like, are they any good at the other stuff? I don't know. And I'm not necessarily saying that I think anyone else is as I get older, I'm like, I don't think anyone's very good at this at all. Just looking at like national debt and looking at the state of the education system and the NHS, I don't think anyone's very good at this at all. But like, if it sort of feels like to vote for a Green Party, you're kind of sacrificing everything else somehow. And am I crazy?
I have a problem with. So, for example, I've often asked myself why I'm a member of the Labour Party and not the Green Party. Like, should I be a member of the Green Party? Why am I a member of the Labour Party? And the fact of the matter is that I can't be. I think presenting on the level of a single issue is not something it's the same as SNP. They're trying to distance themselves from the fact that they are a national, they are fighting on a nationalist ticket, or it's all that kind of like that single issue type thing, politics, party, gathering, UKIP, Green, SM. It's terrible to put them in the same bag.
It's not
fair. It's not fair. I'm sorry. But I don't like it. I couldn't join them. But I got Caroline Lucas as my MP, and I believe that and I am delighted, and I voted for her, and they are, but I think it's massively important that we have Green MPs so that in a parliamentary debate they can represent these issues. It's the same way that, I don't know if you remember when a couple of BNP people got elected at one point, I can't remember if they're MPs or councillors, suddenly it highlighted to the country that racism is a bigger issue than everyone was thinking. It wasn't as loud a smack in the face as post-Brexit, but it does sort of go, oh, I didn't realise. And so unless we need more than one Green MP, that's for sure. But we also need the other parties to take these issues, the issues of survival Because that's really what it boils down
yes,
to.
Well, and I wish we had like a sort of threat level midnight type, you know, like the clock. Like here's we can see this is how long you've got, and I wish that was, and that's another coming back to David McCandless and his charts, and I think there's some very good, like, this is how much longer we've got of this. This is how much longer we've got of this.
Well, also, you know, it's like the doomsday clock maybe needs to adjust away from, you know, nuclear annihilation and start looking at sort of, I don't know, environmental degradation or something.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, we've survived the Cold War. Let's pretend the whole Donald Trump thing isn't happening. It's Fire and Fury tweets or whatever the hell it was. Well, imagine that's not happening, and then ask the doomsday clock to adjust itself to environmental degradation as a little countdown.
And is there any way that looking at that clock isn't just going to bum me out whenever I see it? Like, it's just, I wish there was also here is your little positivity ticker of what you've done today to make things a bit less shitty, and I'm going to use that. Swear I'm going to pay for that one. Well, how can I want to see that I've made things not, it's like
not worse.
It's like those happiness things, isn't it? It's like there's making it better, there's making it not worse, and then there's, I don't know,
maybe we could turn that donut economics thing into a personal measure. So it's like, because her thing is all about companies can't be neutral impact anymore, they have to be positive impact. So maybe it's time as individuals that we think about that, you know, you carry around a little thing in the same way that we measure so many things these days, how many steps you walked, how many times you got on a blah blah blah. Have a thing that says today your environmental impact was +10, take the day off.
Well, maybe that can
have a takeaway coffee tomorrow.
Maybe that can be a grand podcast app. We can have, like, we'll get that donut economics thing. We'll try and kind of get that. We'll make it look a bit nicer. We will share that thing because it was quite an interesting, but sort of like whenever you see it laid out, it's always quite heartbreaking. Like, here's the situation, but maybe we can have a thing that lets people sort of like keep track of what they're doing and some
good and bad stuff that they've done.
That's my wheelhouse. That's maybe something I can do to help.
Well, you know, it's all about the apps these days. If we haven't got an app for it, then it's like it didn't happen.
What's the bloody point?
If my pedometer wasn't working, then it's no point going for a walk.
What you and I want is a bit more. A bit of movement where we fix the flaws to see these problems we have aren't forever. I like to take you for a cup of tea. I like to take you out to see the trees. No matter what you say, your secret's safe with me. You're not afraid. Forget it, forget it, forget it, forget it, forget it. Take the pain away. But what about the good times? The good times, the good times.
Oh, I wonder what our donation to charity is going to be out of this episode.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, someone's going to have
to tell us.
I mean, we could. We could count it. I think it's like if people are listening and they've got a charity, they can count and tell us, and we'll. All right. So thank you for listening to us again this week. Or I'm sorry. Yeah, we do want to do a sort of more scientifically informed and researched version of this, but we are talking about, you know, getting someone who knows more about it to talk to. But anyway, yeah, you can find me on Twitter if you like the podcast at Michael Forrest, and my website is michaelforrestmusic.com.
You can find me at Ivanka on Twitter and Ivanka.blog.
And you can find us both at grandpodcast.com and email us hello@grandpodcast.com.
You can support us on Patreon with grandpodcast.com/pledge or grandpodcast.com/sledge.
I made Ivanka say it.
And please do write a review on iTunes.
Yes, find us on iTunes, write a review. Probably the same goes for Stitcher. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.